Welcome to your promises. Welcome to mine too. Caught like this, I'll turn it in with you. Oh, fall apart my beating heart. Nothing left to do. Once in love, I'll be the death of you. Today we're doing My Bloody Valentine, iconic sophomore album, Loveless.
Welcome to the Essential Albums podcast, where three guys from '85 have a conversation about some of the biggest albums ever and forgotten favorites from yesteryear. We dig into an album's place in culture, discuss its merits, and decide if a record holds up and is worth your time. Of course, we get into a lot more than that, so join longtime friends Ryan, Denise, and Gordon as we dive into our favorite albums and relive some of the classics. All right, so yeah, as you were saying earlier, genre defining. This album kind of strikes me as more of like an indie darling compared to the previous albums we've discussed, like over the last few weeks. I did see that Pitchfork gave it, called it in 1999 the best album of the 90s. Why are we discussing or talking about Loveless this week, Denise?
I don't know. For me, it was part of like when I was kind of getting in like the internet age, when I was kind of exploring all. I kind of discussed it a bit in the Pixies episode, kind of doing research, not research, but you kind of start being able to listen to the bands that you always heard the bands you listened to compared to, or you started reading reviews online and you see like certain bands kept getting brought up. And at the time for me, you had, Radiohead was getting fuzzier, and there was just other music I was being exposed to at the time, and you kind of just keep hearing like bands like Mogwai and Sigur Rós I was getting into, and you would hear the comparison all the time, like My Bloody Valentine, My Bloody Valentine. I'd hear it all the time, My Bloody Valentine, and you look and and at that point it was like a 10-year-old album. I'm like, oh, how have I never heard of this? It's being cited so much, and I just remember taking it in like all at once and just being like, holy cow, this sounds like a lot of stuff that came out after it, but it's like came out before it, but it doesn't sound like it. It's still so unique.
Right.
Like it was sort of like a weird experience because you're like, this kind of sounds like Smashing Pumpkins, but not really. But it's kind of like M83, but not at all. And it's kind of like Mogwai, but no, it's way heavier. It's sort of kind of sat on an island on its own, but sort of you could see the ripple effects that it caused. And it's not like it was the first thing to sound like that, but
Yeah.
again, like that's where the genre defining elements come in. That's where that line comes in.
Right.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's definitely like you were saying, Pixies is kind of you're stepping back, or I was stepping back in time,
Yeah.
getting to know My Bloody Valentine because when I listened to it, I heard I'm like, oh yeah, there's that sounds like Pumpkins. I'm like, oh, that sounds like some of the post rock stuff like Mogwai. I'm like, oh, okay, whoa, this is how old is this album? Like, why are these guitars sound like Fuzz from the mid '90s or whatever? Like, um, yeah, I think it was just that going back and seeing the influences and I think as soon as it put it on though, like it immediately sounded good.
Hmm.
So I think for the Pixies, I had to it took some adjusting. I'm like, okay, there's some elements here that I am unfamiliar with, but it seems like somebody borrowed every element from My Bloody Valentine later on, and so I
Yeah.
was exposed to everything, but just from all these different things. So when I got this all in one package, that's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Can you recall like approximately what year you first heard this album?
Yeah, it was
I,
really well. Go ahead, Anise.
yeah, I was trying to narrow this down too because I'm like, okay, it had to have been like post 2000 because it was definitely internet age, and 2001 2 is when I kind of started getting more into indie rock with band like the White Stripes and Strokes and Interpol were coming out at the time, and Pitchfork became a thing at that time too. So I'm guessing around 2001 2 because that's also around the time I was getting into Sigur Rós and Mogwai at the pretty much end of high school. And I have a friend that's not going to be named that also I think was one of the first ones to tell me about My Bloody Valentine. That yeah, I got into them through him as well, amongst a lot of other bands. But yeah, so I think it was around that kind of grade 12, beginning of college, grade 11, 12 in there, that range. So
Yes, totally. Same
Yeah.
for me. Same for me. Like, I actually really struggled to recall like when I know I remember buying the CD at some CD store, but I was like, how did I actually find out about this band? But I remember just around the end of high school and like beginning of college, I was in a band that covered "When You Sleep" at Coppers, good
Mhm.
old bar. They couldn't pay us for that; they're gone.
Well,
Um, yeah, but when I finally like was listening through, it was when I hit "To Hear Knows When," when or yeah, I just like it brought me back to living in Toronto, like my first apartment, and I could see from that like the balcony, I could see downtown Toronto, but it was in Etobicoke, so it was like a really long distance away from the core of the city still. It's like maybe an hour ride on the subways and buses, and even to get to my campus. So I would have the CD on my Discman or whatever the hell I was listening to at that point. And it's just like thinking of dark nights in a city alone essentially and these long travel journeys to get to the core of the city. That's kind of the imagery that was all brought back when I listened to this, specifically that track.
how about you, Gordon? When did you get into My Bloody Valentine, or did you ever get into My Bloody Valentine?
Yeah, I got into him much later. I think the first time the first memory I have of this band is hearing the song, maybe not specifically this band, but hearing the song Sometimes in the Lost in Translation movie.
Oh yeah,
I
right.
can't remember exactly what scene, but like that song is so distinct. So I remember hearing that song and being like, oh yeah, that song's pretty good. Kind of just like Honey, that Jesus and Mary Chain song. You don't know which band it is, but you're like, that song just sticks with you. And then I think I finally listened to this album for the first time from beginning to end when I think you uploaded a bunch of music to my iPod and East. So this would have been like towards the end of the 2000s, maybe mid 2008, 2009. So that's when I heard it. And I'm like, oh, it's just a whole album that sounds like similar songs, that layered shoegazy stuff. So I instantly became a fan at that point. So it was probably, I want to say like '09, around there. That's kind of when I heard this album for the first time.
It's
Okay, so
funny. It's funny you mentioned Lost in Translation because I kind of use that movie as a point too, because it seemed like that movie and that soundtrack kind of brought shoegaze music into prevalence in a weird way. Like at that point, My Bloody Valentine was getting talked again because Kevin Shields was involved with the soundtrack,
Mm-hmm.
and like Mary Chain featured prominently in the movie, and they were a band that even predates My Bloody Valentine. So you had that whole fuzzy sound too, and then you have the echo of that of bands that were coming out around that time, uh, like M83, or a band like The Pains of Being Pure at Heart, or a band like Waves, or a band like Washed Out. Like there were so many, or Neon Indian. There were so many of this sort of dream pop shoegazy stuff that was coming out around the time too. So it kind of all
yeah,
fit in
to-
line.
totally. Actually, at that time, like around 2009, Gordon, you showed me M83, and so curious. So you probably knew M83 before My Bloody Valentine, I'm guessing.
Um, yeah, I think the first M83 song I heard, and Nice probably played it for me. I think it was Teen Angst. That was probably the first
Yeah,
M83
yeah, yeah.
song I heard. So yeah, it would have probably been right around that time.
Oh,
Like
around the
07.
same time. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So what
Uh,
elements did you hear? Like when you first heard Loveless, like what elements from other bands? Did anything kind of click?
for me, I definitely got the Pumpkins vibe. I very strong with that, especially like their earlier stuff, or even up to Melancholy. Just the layered
Yeah.
guitars and stuff like that. And then I also drew a lot of comparisons because I was getting more into like indie rock, paying a lot more attention to Pitchfork. So indie bands like that were to come after. So for example, like Anise just mentioned a bunch, and like Washed Out, Neon Indian. Of course, you got like Deer Hunter, Girls. I can't remember when that Hellhole Rat Race came out, but I just hear like pure shoegaze when I hear that song, just like all the layers to it, and almost like noise. Like,
Yeah.
so that's kind of, and then of course you revisit you discover the older things. So I do remember like kind of getting more into like Sonic Youth and hearing like the noise on their older stuff, going back to that, and it's like, okay, I can see where all these influences, and it just seemed like this album, because it's 91, it doesn't really sound like it came out in the early 90s, but it just kind of puts everything together.
Mm-hmm.
So
Because like what you were saying with the album, you kind of hear the stuff that kind of came before it, because bands like, or even other shoegaze bands that are around at the same time, like Ride and Slow Dive and stuff. So it kind of came out in the middle, but it kind of echoed so much. That's why it's like genre defining, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I can ask a general question to kind of get us into the album. What is your relationship to M80, or not M83, to My Bloody Valentine? Like, have you kept up with it? I know it's not hard to keep up with them because they have so few releases, but have you, like, I think their latest release was 2013. Were you following them the entire time?
Yeah, like I was saying kind of before the show when I was talking with Gordon, how they've always seemed to become re-relevant. So like I kind of got into them, around the time I was getting into Mogwai and Sigaros and the post rock at the end of high school in 2001, 2002. So I kind of got into them through there. But then you had the dream pop and the noise rock that kind of came in the early 2000s, which it was still relevant during that time, and then they were part of the soundtrack, relevant still. And then they got together by 2008 and toured. They became, I went to go see them live, so I was still listening to them at that point. And then they released a new album in 2013. Again, you get the bump from that. So it seemed like, even though everything was coming out sparse from them, and them being involved in things have been very sparse over the past 30 years, they've stayed relevant and just how good this album is. So
yes,
it's not an album I put on every day, or not even, I may even go a year or two without listening to it, but it's definitely an album that I do go back and revisit every so often, or songs I will revisit. It always seems to be relevant. Like it's crazy how they were able to create such a sound that you can listen to today and it still fits in with similar music coming out today.
yeah, I instantly fell in love with it, and it's partially the aesthetic too, like the whole aesthetic that goes along with it, and that in combination with the fact that they have a whole series of like actual songs, like well written songs with nice chord changes and nice melodies and maybe nice lyrics. I don't know, I can't really hear them, but like the aesthetic of it is like this washed out dream pop kind of feel, where the vocals are just like part of the instruments, and I don't know. I guess that's why I fell in love with it, but I forget what the question was.
Oh yeah, just your current relationship.
Oh so yeah, right. Well, that
yeah. So I mean, I know this album, and I mean, I think when Anise hooked me up with his music on the iPod, it was before their latest release in 2013. So this week was the first week where I actually heard that album, and I thought it was really good. Like I was totally missing out on a hidden gem. So I knew all their prior stuff, and I forget the album that's before this one. But that's kind of the older stuff is what I knew. So I'm glad I was able to kind of rediscover My Bloody Valentine. It's nothing, I say rediscover, I mean listen to it again and find something new from an old band. But at the same time, I do enjoy, like, for example, this week, listening to like all this shoegaze music while I'm working. I listened to the 3 albums, and then I just kept listening to like the channels. So it was just kept throwing hits, or not hits, but like more songs through the Spotify algorithm. And it was just a great week to work. Like this, like shoegaze, lo-fi stuff, I really work well with, because I don't have to pay attention to the lyrics. It's not like rap music where it's like that's the main focus. It's more like electronica or this, where it's like, okay, I'm just listening to music. It's something I can work to, almost like going to the gym, but like head down and I'm doing my work.
I know, like even a year ago, I shared like one of the playlists on Spotify with Gordon. I'm like, check out this playlist. It was called Noisy, and it's modern bands that have come out pretty much songs that have come out in the last 4 or 5 years, and it's all very akin to My Bloody Valentine, and it's still like relevant music. It's like I guess it is shoegaze music, but it's almost like a subgenre unto itself.
Yeah.
Like yeah.
So I guess yeah, I guess we can move on to some album questions. So I since I came to this album late, I didn't know there was any singles. There's only one single technically. It's the first track, Only Shallow. I know sometimes I would have assumed that was a single, but it's mostly because it was just on the soundtrack. So I guess we can kick this off by asking what do you guys think is the biggest song from this one? I think I'm kind of showing my cards a little bit by saying sometimes, but what do you guys think is the biggest song?
Well, like I thought "When You Sleep" was the biggest song, but I don't know how to like. What do you mean big? None of these songs were big.
Right.
Well, I think it's When You Sleep and Only Shallow are the two. I have to say they're probably neck and neck, but it seems
Okay.
like just the album in general, like when you look at the amount of streams, it's all pretty equal. Those two songs do have the most, and along with sometimes, but this album just overall seems to be listened to. It's like the album is bigger than any individual song is.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I don't know about you guys, but when I put it on, it's especially a lot of stuff in this dream pop, noisy shoegaze genres and subgenre. It really sets a scene. Like all these guitars and it's all full. You're like, it really pulls. I don't know. It really pulls me into a mood. So, and it's like a steady, almost relaxed mood. There's no. In a way, it's like easy listening. There's no like but there is harshness, but it's hard. It's a really, I don't know how they achieved it with all these out of tune notes and all these weird guitar layers. How do they make it so nice?
I think this goes for a lot of the dream pop and like the phasey sort of sound, but they have a bit more uneasiness to their music than
Yeah.
the other bands, but it still sort of works. But yeah, it definitely sets a vibe, whether it's a summer day, you're out for a drive, or a winter day. It definitely sets a mood. You can put it on in the background and carry a conversation over the music, or you can put it on and actively listen to it, and you'll get a sense of satisfaction as well.
Yeah, but it's because it sets that scene. I think once you put the album on, it's cozy. You don't really want to turn it off. So I think a lot of people just leave it on. I just leave it on.
But if there was one song to be the biggest, it probably would be Only Shallow, because I know for me, if I'm introducing someone to My Bloody Valentine, it's a song I play.
Okay.
And even the guy at work he's kind of stuck in the 90s, but he's opposed to any. I'll play him bands that sound like 90s bands, and he'll still be opposed to them. But whatever. I played him Only Shallow, and he's like, "Oh yeah, this kind of sounds like Smashing Pumpkins." He's sort of into it. I don't think he ever went back and listened to it again, but he appreciated it. So it is one of the more accessible, along with some other tracks, but definitely that is probably the biggest on the album.
Yeah, and it's a great starter track because I mean it kicks off with those drums, but then all of a sudden it just kind of washes over you. Like kind of going back to what Ryan was saying, it feels like there is harshness to it, but you're never going to get hit with a jagged edge. It's like you're being taken through like maybe a river wild or something, some rapids or something, but like you always feel safe. Like you don't have to worry about the rocks or anything like that. You're just being pushed along.
It's a good analogy. Yeah. Like there's out of tune notes and some chorusy effects that like pull away from like the key. They're full of tension, but they never go too far. And they always bring back.
Because what they're doing is they're playing pretty much with their hand on the whammy bar.
Yeah.
The whole time.
That makes sense. That explains it.
So it's like, that's why even when you look at pictures of them live, like Belinda Butcher's hand is just always on the whammy bar. Kevin Shields' hand's always on the whammy bar. That's what creates that uneasiness.
I kind of wish we were closer because I don't remember seeing that when we saw them at the Cool House or whatever. But maybe it's a good thing that we weren't closer because you'd probably be deaf.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, apparently, just a note on that. Yeah, it's called like glide guitar, and then like Kevin Shields is known for like creating that. I just thought it was like something that everybody did because I don't know anything about guitar, but like it just seems like the two can go together, right? So like, why aren't people doing that? But yeah, apparently he's the one that's kind of credited with developing that guitar technique.
It's more of a thing that you see in solos and like blues songs or country songs. Kind of gives you more of a twang. Another, I guess, notable like indie rock guitar player that sort of does a similar thing is Isaac Brock from Modest Mouse. He will do that a lot as well, kind of create that uneasiness sound to the guitar.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned him because there's I forget what song, I have a note for it, but it seems like this album's lo-fi, but then I read more and it's not really lo-fi. It's just that they kind of record it mono and it's just layered. So it's kind of got like that weird, like it reminded me, some of the songs remind me of early Modest Mouse, like Novocaine Stain and some of that earlier stuff. But yeah, it's definitely, they're not lo-fi, which I thought was interesting.
Part of the reason people say that is probably because the vocals are so low, and like that's unusual for people who are used to hearing anything on the radio. It's really quite weird. So that just itself sounds lo-fi. Like I can't hear the words. Like I did a live stream show a couple weeks ago, and I like this kind of aesthetic where the vocals are. It's more egalitarian, you know. It's like just
Yeah.
part of the team. It's not a singer and a backup. Uh, but like the host, while we were doing sound checks, she's just like, you should turn the vocals up. I like the vocals higher. I'm like, well, I guess I boost them a little bit for everybody else, but I prefer to be buried in my guitars.
Yeah, I like it when the vocals are sort of buried, like it's part of the band,
Yeah.
not sitting on top of it. Another,
Well, yeah.
another connection to a band we've talked about before too. That sorry, this is coming out of left field, but um, Deftones, they sort of had that drony guitar sound, phasey with the vocals. Their vocals were always sort of lower in the mix, and
Yeah.
Chino's screaming to rise above it.
Yeah,
But
like
yeah.
Be Quiet and Drive for sure. That's totally in there.
Yeah, no, it's funny that you mentioned that song because when I was listening to like the shoegaze, I guess playlist on Spotify, that was like one of the tracks, only that Deftones song, but that one was included in that list. So I mean, just to kind of continue on this sidebar for a sec, what do you guys like? What are the characteristics of like shoegaze? Like I know the whole concept is like guitar players staring at their feet, well, staring at their pedals, but like I mean, if I talk too loudly about shoegaze, my wife might think we're shoe shopping or something like that. But like, I know that's the characteristic. And then reading into it a little bit more this week, I did see that artists tend to use the vocals more as like what you guys are saying, like even so, like the vocals are more of an instrument and not like the centerpiece.
Yeah.
Like, what do you guys think, or what do you have to add?
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Like even some bands like Sigur Rós take it to the next level where in some songs he's not even singing lyrics. He's just sort of singing a made up
Making
language.
shit up. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's Icelandic.
Yeah, or even like a band like M83 on those early releases, they were using like samples and in place of vocals and stuff. So
Yeah.
vocals aren't as important.
Yeah, I think this is really we can't we shouldn't understate the cultural significance of this because like what are you doing if you're the singer in a band? Like you're always told, oh, you got to be up at the front, you got to be sing loud into the microphone, you're supposed to be the star. What are you doing if you're just sitting at or standing and looking at your shoes? You're like, fuck the crowd, who cares? You're in your own world. That's a different attitude.
Yeah.
That's like it's me and my music, and if you like it, cool. If you don't like it, it totally goes against I think the younger generations, the Instagram and TikTok generations who are like basically selling out every day. In the minds of My Bloody Valentine in the '90s, it'd be like, what the hell are you doing? Like they're not gonna. You know what I'm saying? Is the idea isn't to show off overtly. You're in your own world, and everybody in the band is equal. Nobody's like above the other. So it's this whole aesthetic.
Well, as far as that goes, I think it's more what fits the music. So yeah, like even having a good voice as opposed to an interesting voice, like depending on the type of music, I prefer a person with an interesting voice as opposed to a person who has like a classically nice voice. And same thing goes with this for My Bloody Valentine or other bands with this sort of wall of sound aesthetic. Having the vocal lower in the mix works. Like in Deftones, it works as well because he's trying to scream over the music almost, which kind of gives him a different sound to his voice than other metal bands or whatever. But as far as selling out goes, I don't know. It's a different time now, so it's just about making money, which you kind of have to. I kind of understand that element of it all.
This is what I'm saying. I'm saying that attitude of like the '90s rock, like oh, don't be a sellout, or even like has kind of been beaten out of people by social media. It's like, nope, sorry, you gotta We're gonna ask you to like and subscribe this damn thing. We're gonna sell out.
I'll counter that point because another modern act that's very popular. They have a very lo-fi sound, very phasey. His vocals are lower in the mix as well. Tame Impala, very very popular.
It's true.
So I think that just goes to show you, as long as the music is good, people will be attracted to it. So even like with my Bloody Valentine, it's not like they're trying to showcase a vocalist. If they're trying to showcase a vocalist, it makes no sense to do that. But this is a band, so I'm fine with the vocals being like that.
But I mean, you have to admit, part of the like sort of cultural or like the values of the shoegaze movement is to not give a shit about who's watching, and you're doing your music.
So are you saying it's more like the emphasis is more on the music and building the album than it is on everything else regarding the music?
Yeah, like all the like, look at the album art. Like, nobody's pictures on the album art, obviously. It's like it's pretty obscure, and it's just like a guitar. Like, it's not about showing off. That's why you're looking at your shoes. And maybe you got guitar pedals to aim for.
It's just a punk thing. It was just what was going on in the 90s.
Yeah. It's like part of that reaction against the hair metal glam of the 80s. Like, look at me, I'm sparkly. It's like, fuck that.
Yeah.
So I guess we can move on to the next question. Should we just skip the overplayed song? I mean, I don't think there's anything overplayed on this album. If anything, it should be played more often. But how do you feel?
Overplayed and underrated. I guess those two questions, they're probably both like, nothing's overplayed, everything's underrated.
Yeah.
True.
All right, that sums it up.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how many like listens this episode gets, just based off of like how indie this album is, or like how it seems like it's kind of like a hidden gem. Like, you have to know somebody to get you into like My Bloody Valentine, unless you just really like the Lost in Translation soundtrack.
Yeah, because even just looking online, where you look how many it's sold in the UK, that's all it really shows on Wikipedia, is how much it's sold in the UK, and it's 60,000. It's like so low. Like, to think it only sold that many copies. I guess more people might have it downloaded and stuff now.
Yeah.
Like on Spotify, they do get over 1 million monthly listeners, so they do have a following. But I don't know, they don't. Yeah, it'd be nice if they were more of a household name and there was more attention paid.
They're an Irish band, right?
Yeah,
like
from Dublin.
Completely Irish, all the members.
I think it's Irish English.
Yeah, I think Kevin Shields has like, I think he's got dual citizenship. I think he's got like he's like half American, half Irish. Because when I saw an interview with him, he didn't have an accent, so I didn't see any other interviews with anybody else. So I don't know.
Should have done the episode on St. Patty's Day. Next year.
Top of the morning.
How about like Belinda Butcher is from London, England.
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess they're sort of. That's why they're credited as both.
Right.
Yep.
I think the other guy, the drummer, he seems to have a really Irish name. What's his name? Colm Kosig? I don't know if I'm saying that right.
Yeah, he's probably Irish. Yeah, he's from Dublin. So yeah, they're pretty much half and half.
Right.
The men are from Ireland, the women are from England.
Nice, a United Kingdom. So I guess this can bring us to what's your favorite track from this album then? Go for it, Anise.
I probably only Shallow. That's the one I revisit the most. But I also listen to like When You Sleep. I only said, like, I don't know. This album is always sort of taken as a whole. But if I had to pick one track, probably only Shallow. That's the one that when I first heard it, I was like, whoa! It kind of slapped me right in the face. Instantly, I made the connection to being a big Smashing Pumpkins fan. I'm like, Jesus, sounds like Smashing Pumpkins. Almost sounds like a lost Siamese dream track. And and I never heard a guitar sound like, but at the same time, I'd like never heard a guitar sound like that before. I don't know, just it had such a unique sound to it.
Mm-hmm.
Going into like the Loomer, the next track, it's almost like I've never heard a guitar sound like that. It's almost like they were using the guitar as a different element. So only Shallow, probably that one, just because it's the one that made me a fan.
Yeah. How about you, Ryan?
My favorite track is To Hear Knows When. It's the weirdest name. I always stumble when I try to say that name. Like, what does that even mean? But
Yeah.
I just love how it feels. Like it kind of gives me goosebumps. It sounds like there's pipes going through the wall, like water going through pipes in the walls, or like the Enterprise engine noise going on in the background. Just this like light rumble. I don't know. It feels really cozy. So whenever I listen to the album, it's like I love it, right? But when I get there, it's like goosebumps. It has something to do with the level of the drums and the guitar. Like the drums are so low, I can't describe it. Listen to it.
On that track too, it's like I don't know what the guitars are doing to sound like that. It's like are
Yeah.
they? I don't know what he's doing because I'm a like when I play guitar, it was a lot more like this style. Like I was very noisy. Played with I was kind of like a shoegaze type guitar. That was my style. But a song like Two Here Knows What When, I have no idea what he's doing on that thing.
Yeah.
Like I don't know what sort of delay he's using, what sort of face he's using. I have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, it'd be hard to replicate for sure.
Yeah, it sounds so unique.
Yeah, the title of the song kind of reminds me of a Pumpkins song. Like it sounds like a
Oh,
Pumpkins title.
I almost said To Hear Knows Why, I think, because isn't
Isn't that a Pumpkins song? Is that a,
Here Knows Why or Here Knows When or something. Fuck.
Yeah.
yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it seems like the pulsing sound on that track is just kind of relentless, and it's just pushing forward the whole time. So yeah, I do enjoy that track quite a bit. I had Soon, the last track.
Oh, great.
I just
That's
like
good.
how it starts out. Like the first 45 seconds, it kicks off, and it sounds like it could just be a classic 90s alternative song. And then about 45 seconds in, all of a sudden, it just like really takes off, and it's like almost not like a jet engine, but you just feel the force of that track, and it just goes on for well almost 7 minutes long. And then at the very end, it kind of softens up, like the last I think 30 seconds or so. And there's a little part there where it sounds like the Chemical Brothers sampled it for Sunshine Underground, like just the way it kind of mellows out and the
Mm.
beginning of Sunshine Underground, the way that track starts on Surrender, an album we previously discussed. But yeah, just like the different directions it goes, it's like it's constant kind of noise or shoegaze, but then there's like elements in there where it's changing, and it gives you a big there's a good range to it.
I like how when it starts, you get that beat loop, and it's usually in the album. A lot of the beats are buried, but it's kind of right in your face. And
Yeah.
it kind of sounds different, and the guitars come in, and it kind of it does sound like a '90s alternative song. But then when the song finally settles in, you're like, oh shit, this like slowly morphed into one of their tracks, but it's a lot has like a lot more pep than a lot of the other songs. But
Totally. When you're listening to the album, you're kind of like the vibes like, oh, this is lo-fi, everything's hidden, and then but you're loving it, and these are good songs. You almost wish you could hear it in high definition, but I think that might take away from it. But anyway, you get to the last track, and you're like, okay, suddenly it's not like you couldn't have done it in high definition. Suddenly we're in high definition, and everything sounds really nice. And but of course, as it goes on, they sneak in their guitars, and before you know it, back in a wall of sound. But it comes down to the sound of the drums a lot.
yeah,
Yeah. So
definitely.
I did read somewhere that for the drummer of this band, he was dealing with kind of physical ailments and stuff while they were recording this album. It took him like over 2 years, or I think over 3 years, to record this album. So he only actually did like live drumming and was recorded on 2 tracks. And everything else was kind of just like samples of drums and stuff like that. So, and then hearing like, for example, like a track like Sometimes, I'm like, are there even drums like on this track? Like, it just seems like it's the guitar that's kind of creating like the percussion in a way.
Yeah, this it's just it's basically just vocals, acoustic guitar, and that like fuzz overlay of electric guitar. I don't think there's anything else in the song, is there? I don't think so.
Yeah, it didn't sound like that to me. I don't know. You guys would know better than me though.
Yeah, I think it's just like I don't
Yeah, I
know.
was just gonna say about the recording process too. Like, but when you read about how it was all done, it's all kind of like done over such a long period of time. I was like, when you read about When You Sleep, the drums were recorded in September of '89. The guitars were done in December. The bass was done in April of '90. It's like, what the hell's going on? Like, the song is like, are they just putting that much work into it? Are they slowly doing it? Are they going back? Like,
Yeah,
maybe, yeah, they. I don't know. It seems like such a
I think
weird
I
way to
know what
work.
was going on, man. Like this is 91. How big is this band? They're not big. They don't have a lot of money, I'm assuming. Like were they signed when they started recording this? Did they have a bunch of money behind them?
Yeah.
They were.
So crazy story about this. Like these guys, Kevin Shields kind of strikes me as like a Michael Cimino type. He's the guy that directed like Deer Hunter, and then he directed famously or infamously like Heaven's Gate. So that movie went like years over budget, production, everything just kind of went crazy, and that movie bankrupted United Artists. So with this album took I think 3 years to make, and then so they bankrupted, and well, it's been disputed, but they essentially went over budget with everything, and it cost over, well, estimates vary, but apparently it cost £250,000 at the time to make this album. So it pretty much bankrupted the record label Creation. So the record label was pretty much like, we're going to push it as hard as we can because it's like the critics are really into it. They funded the beginning of the tour, but then after they severed ties because they're like, we can't work with Kevin Shields anymore. He's too crazy.
So that's why it takes forever to record an album.
Yeah.
I also heard he was, I don't know, I remember reading this back in the day, but I remember he was also pretty meticulous about live shows and was very particular about the equipment used at shows and would want to tour with his own like speakers and sound systems. And yeah, apparently he was very like a prima donna when it came to a lot of that stuff.
Yeah, I think I did see an interview this week, and he has a guitar separate, like a different guitar for every song, so he doesn't have to do different tunings. And he's got apparently on his pedal board, he's got over 30 pedals. So that just seems like extreme, but I mean, given the different sounds. But yeah, is that a lot? I don't know.
Yes.
Okay. Like what's an average average amount of pedals for like a decent guitar player? Like 5 or 6 or less?
I would say, yeah, normally like an average rock and roll guitar player probably has like, I don't know, an overdrive, maybe a chorus, maybe a delay. It just depends what kind of music you're playing. But for a shoegaze guy, the more the merrier. Like they just whatever ones you could find. Like I know for bands like Sonic Youth, they even like finding broken ones that they can make weird sounds out of. And
Yeah.
I've heard Reznor say stuff like that. You can get like, you open up a circuit board and fuck around and create a different sound that no one else gets. And I guess this is what these guys do to differentiate themselves. So yeah, 30 pedals, yeah, might sound crazy, but for certain guitar players, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it would make sense for this. Did they use multiple amps? Like I seem to remember more amps being on stage than
Probably,
guitars.
I would assume so.
It was certainly loud enough to be
Yeah.
multiple amps.
Yeah, and then there's like so much kind of crazy like trivia with the recording of this. Like Alan Mulder, who we've talked about previous work that he's done, he was an engineer at the time, so he gained the respect of the group, and he was pretty much their go-to engineer during the recording process. He just started out by, I guess, miking up their amps, and then they were like, "We really like what you're doing," so they kept him on board as their go-to guy. And then there's a point where he had to leave due to other commitments in spring of 1990, and then he came back in August to work with them, but like pretty much nothing was done while he was gone, so he was like surprised. And then this album was recorded overnight in 19 different studios, and they pretty much just went through engineer after engineer. And it was so crazy with like some of the recording process that they would go in a room to record like the vocals, and they would close the curtains, and they would make the engineer wait outside, and they had to just pretty much rely on the VU meter just to see when the take was done. And then they would, if it was a good take, they would open the curtains, and then the engineer would come in and be like, okay, that's okay. If not, then he would have to go in and kind of reset the tape, and they would have to go do another take. So it's just like an insane way of approaching it. But like, I guess that's what makes this album so good. Since they're not like really professionals, they're pretty amateur when they came into it. They were willing to do anything on this, right? So that's pretty cool.
Amateur, okay, but it seems like
Maybe not.
very like controlling, like prima donna kind of.
Right,
yeah, we're gonna do it this way. We have to. It's gonna ruin the art. Like so, like that would not fly with a record deal to these days, unless the band was already amazing, like already huge.
A band like this nowadays, that's the thing. Nowadays, you only have like the two extremes, really. You have a band that's sort of indie and small and doing it themselves online. Yes, they can do and take as much time as they want.
Exactly, yeah.
Or you release that song, becomes super huge, where people start giving you blank checks and allowing you to do whatever you want. And the more ridiculous requests you make, the more interested people are in your art. So
I guess more what I mean is when you're at that other end of the extreme today, you can't afford to use what 15 different engineers and
yeah,
19
yeah,
studios and whatever the hell. It's
obviously,
like,
Yeah.
but it'd be more in your own hands.
yeah.
But if it took you a year to do something like to do one song, all the power to you. Do it.
Yeah. It seems like they were just given a bunch of money and they're like, all right, let's do everything we can.
Yeah, so I mean, there's often disputes. Like, I mean, just hearing kind of the quotes go back and forth between the record label owner and Kevin Shields. It seems like Kevin Shields is like, yeah, we never cost that much. If anything, we just need the money to like live for those 3 years. But like, if anything, it was like tens of thousands of dollars. It wasn't like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then the other guy's like, yeah, no, he's like, I got the accounting and stuff like that. So it's just funny to see that. But I mean, I guess that's just how rock stars work.
Yeah, and a lot of record labels though do pull that shit because the deals usually go where they're like, okay, we're gonna sign this record deal and we're gonna give you a budget to do this album, and once the album goes out, you gotta pay us back the budget first before you see anything from the album sales. And by the way, we decide how the budget is spent. We decide where the money goes, and you can't see that shit. So who knows? Who knows how much they could actually see or where money's going at what time to what? Who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, no, I totally get that because, like, I mean, you look at movies. Like, a movie can make hundreds of millions of dollars, and it still takes like a loss. And it's like, what kind of accounting is that? So it happens everywhere. So I guess are there any other tracks you guys want to talk about? Is there like an underrated track you wanted to mention, or I guess we kind of
I
crossed
like
off
the
of
whole
the
thing,
tracks,
but
what do you guys think?
The song Loomer always kind of gave me Radiohead optimistic vibes. Just
Yeah.
how like it kicks in.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't know. It's hard to break. It's hard to break up this album into tracks and to discuss the tracks individually because it is all sort of very thick, very drony, very phasey. It's more of just like the experience of the whole album and just the sound of the whole album.
yeah.
Like there are songs I love and don't love, but it's more just the experience of like I know we say this a lot on this show, but this is one of those albums that's very much the album. It's very much like a whole that yeah, you can pull out individual tracks and have an appreciation for it, but it's more just the collection of all of this. It's just sounds so unique, like the whole thing.
Yeah, it's not a singles album, so
No.
you can't pull it apart like that. But I will say I really like Blown a Wish.
Yeah,
When the chords start to change, it's just like because they're good at good chord changes, but for a while there they're just holding you like on a loop, and then finally, bam, they give it to you. I just love that moment.
that's one of the ones that sounds like the most uneasy.
Yeah,
Like-
yeah. Until the chords change.
Another song, yeah. But a song like on the other side, you have a song like "Coming Alone," which is it's a lot more rockier. That sounds a lot more like it could have been on like a Siamese Dream.
Yeah.
So they have like different elements to their phase and their noise.
I don't hear the Pumpkins anymore. Like that association has been, I guess, just over time erased or muddled. I remember when I first heard this and being like, "Oh, that's a Smashing Pumpkins sound," and I don't hear that anymore.
How do you feel about? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Denise.
For me, it's more like the closest comparison for like a person who's doesn't really know. It's more of just like a general public. I think would be Siamese Dream because I think it's the most like it. Yeah, you can get into bands like M83 or Neon Indian or whatever that it sounds more like maybe now once you know more about it. But I think it's just the easiest connection for me, especially when I first listened to it, was just Siamese Dream. Like even beyond Smashing Pumpkins-y, it was just more Siamese Dream. That's why I make that connection a lot.
Almost guaranteed in one of those 30 pedals is a big muff. Almost guaranteed. Yeah. Or maybe a few big muffs.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah, I did have a note here. It's funny that you bring up the Pumpkins comparison. For track 10, what you want. That song sounded to me like it was like an early demo of like a Pumpkin song with like James Eha doing the vocals. Like that one I could like I could hear pumpkins in it out of
Yeah.
all the tracks. That one the most.
Yeah, it's weird how those associations are built because, going back in time like that, it's just really strange. You start to hear over but the greatest thing about this album is that it's like I said earlier, all of the elements were used up. So if anybody grew up in the 90s but missed this, they'll probably like this as soon as they put it on.
Yeah, definitely. I completely agree with that. That's what we're saying.
If you see so much of like that, the sound that this sort of brought, that this sort of created, you see the echo of it so much in modern music. You can hear you can make those connections to Smashing Pumpkins, to Deftones, to Sigur Rós and Mogwai. You can make those connections easily.
Yeah, all those indie bands, Young Galaxy comes to mind. Just
Yeah.
yeah.
Because even like this album is, like I was saying earlier, it's still relevant. You can still play it with if you have a more lo-fi sort of phasey dream pop mix, you can still throw songs from this on with current dream pop style songs and it would fit.
Yeah. I guess another duo or another band like Beach House kind of has that dream pop vibe. Yeah. And then I just kind of going back to what you mentioned a little bit earlier, Anise, like the way you hear the album, it's more as like you want to listen to it as a whole, but it feels like I think there's like at least 3 or 4 tracks on this album where it's like these could be singles, but then they kind of veer off, where it's like, okay, maybe they're not radio friendly, but like they definitely have the poppiness to them where if you're a casual listener of this kind of music, you'll probably still dig it.
Yeah. Well, could you get the songs will get like really repetitive and it'll just be like the same riff with the same little lead part playing over and over and over again for the last like 3 minutes of a song.
Right.
Like other elements might come in and it might get, they might start playing with something else in the song. But yeah, you could probably make radio edits and release them. They could have done that. There are videos. When you go on YouTube, they do have videos for other songs. So like, where were they played? Like, I don't really, like My Bloody Valentine music videos, I never saw them on Much Music. Were they on MTV? Like,
maybe.
I was just gonna say maybe The Wedge. That's probably the only thing I can think of.
Sorry?
The Wedge.
The Wedge, maybe. Yeah, because when you go onto their YouTube, they have a music video for Only Shallow, Swallow, To Hear Knows When, Soon. So it's like they have other music videos on here. So
it's almost like they have really nice melodies that could do well. They're pop melodies with pop chord changes that could do well if the vocals were louder, maybe. But it's going to take away from the whole picture. But it seems like the hooks aren't really so much in the vocals. Often the hooks are like in the guitar riffs or the little, those are the catchy bits.
And also, if you're gonna if you're gonna make the vocals more prominent, you almost have to make the guitar less interesting, less full to the sound to make room for the vocals. So it would take away from the sound, because you do have bands like from before, like the Jesus and Mary Chain, who was doing something similar, but a lot more popular. It's just more of the dream pop. This is where the more of the shoegaze element comes in, because there's less, like Ryan was talking about earlier, less emphasis on the vocals, less emphasis on making it. It's more about making it interesting as opposed to making it accessible.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it makes it interesting to cover, because you're forced to sound different, because it's expensive to buy 30 pedals to get that sound.
Yeah, it's gonna be ridiculously expensive. But I did see hear some of the earlier stuff like this week, and it seemed like in the mid '80s they were going for more of like a punk, or like it was a lot noisier, a lot more aggressive. But then they seem to mellow out. So with each of their albums, like '88, '91, they seem to find the sound where it's mellow enough and it's not as like in your face or as punk. It's more, I guess, I don't know, post punk or that it mellows out a little bit, and it's I think for the better. I think that's why everybody likes them, or they're as catchy as they are.
Yeah.
Now it's funny that you guys mentioned the lyrics. It seems like they like to be very cryptic with their lyrics and don't like to provide their lyrics, because I mean, to them, they don't see them as being important. So like a lot of the lyrics were kind of recorded in a weird way, where like Kevin Shields would like lay down a track, and then was it Belinda? She would she would hear it on the tape and then try and like interpret what he was saying or try and repeat the lyrics that he was saying, and then re-record them, her own vocal track of her interpretation of those lyrics. And there are other weird things that they would do. Like she likes to incorporate her dreams into her lyrics. So like he would wake her up at like 7:30 in the morning and be like, hit the mic, let's record some lyrics. Just like record the first things that come to mind and we'll use that. So, I mean, they seem to be, very cryptic with their lyrics. So I don't know, what song did you take the lyrics from, Anise? I didn't look up any lyrics this week, but what song did you use?
Blown a Wish.
Oh, okay, nice.
To be honest, I have no idea what they're saying in any song. I
had no idea.
I just picked that song because it's one of the most interesting songs where I was like, I wonder what she's saying on this one.
Yeah. That's really interesting, Gordon, that the process that a bunch of the processes they're using to make the album reinforces the aesthetic. Like the lyrics don't matter, the vocals are on the same playing field, so we're just gonna have them kind of lost and translated between two of the band members. Like that's obviously when you get the actual product, the actual album, all of these little things, like there's a lot of subtle connections that you maybe couldn't have made consciously, but it's just because you went through this process recording it that they were made. And then, you get a deep album.
I think, subconsciously it definitely adds to the listening experience. Like you're like, I don't know what's going on, but at the same time, it's like, I can work to this, but I could also just fall asleep to this. It's kind of like in that weird in between.
Because it still has the calming elements to it. So even though it is doing a bunch of new things and different things and uneasy things, there's still that overall fuzziness and warmness, and the drums aren't aggressive. It's pretty warm sounding.
It sounds like, or it feels like a good dream. Like it's interesting that you mentioned the whole dream connection, because dreams are kind of scattered and don't make sense a lot of the time. So that would make sense why they would just pull the lyrics out like that. But also, it sounds like a good dream. It feels like a good dream. You're in a good place. Like you don't want to wake up.
Dream pop.
Dream pop. So did you guys have any other tracks you want to mention before we kind of move on? Anything that we may have forgot to mention?
The weird little track there, the third track, we should mention that. That's kind of cool.
Which one, sorry?
Oh, the instrumental?
Yeah, isn't that track 3? I think.
Yeah.
Touch. That always reminded me like it would be a song that would be played in an old 70s Turkish movie when I was growing up. My parents used to watch these like old Turkish movies. But
so weird. Yeah. No, maybe that's the out-of-tuneness that they're using, because that kind of, you hear that in some different cultures, like there's like quarter tones in different musical frameworks, so you don't hear that in Western music, and that's one important point about this band. Like for me, that's maybe the fresh spice that they brought. That's the one thing that maybe other bands haven't really copied so much. I mean, we talked about it a bit in the guitar context, but not really in the mainstream so much. Having so many melodies that are out of tune in some respect, like they go out of tune at the end, or the whole thing's chorusy or something, and it somehow still sounds pleasant. Like that really inspired me as a guitar player.
Yeah. So, were you guys have been in bands together? So, were these guys like really influential on the music you guys made?
I would say.
Yeah, for me personally, as a guitar player, I wasn't like the guy who would rip solos or anything like that. I was more of the, let's make this sound really full and let's try to make this sound interesting. So I was trying to mimic more of these sounds, as opposed to like a Carlos Santana, as you will.
Nice.
Yeah, the wall of sound. I mean, just remember how many tracks we would record for Fans of Crime stuff. It would just be like, all right, let's just keep going. Like, who cares? It just sounds cool. And I think Billy Corgan said once in interviews, like, if you're only recording like 1 or 2 guitar tracks, like, what are you doing? That's part of the vibe. So definitely influenced.
But I can also see the elements like of how it can get out of hand in studio, because I remember even just recording 1 or 2 tracks, just me and Ryan together in that room he's in right now, and you just be like, oh, let's add this, let's do this, let's do this, let's add this, and you get to a point where you're like, can we even play this song live, like with just two guitars?
If you have 30 pedals, perhaps. So I didn't notice any lacking. Like when we saw them, I didn't notice. It was a different thing. I guess it was a different thing.
When we saw them live, it was so loud. Like my ears were ringing for days. And after seeing them live, listening to the album sounded so muted compared to them live, where it was just so loud.
Yeah, well, those frequencies were permanently destroyed in your eardrums. So
Yeah, like when we were walking in, they were handing out earplugs, and I was like, "What?" Like I generally don't wear earplugs at shows, so I'm like, "No, I don't need it. I'm good." But I didn't realize, like, I knew it was going to be louder because you kind of hear the stories, but I wish I would have grabbed earplugs. It was kind of, especially at the end there, when they were at the end they play "You Made Me Realize" and just sort of extend the ending and just keep looping and looping and looping and looping and looping and looping and looping.
well, what were they looped? They weren't really looping. They were just like making noise. Like the drummer's just going,
Yeah.
and the guitars are just like the whole time. And I don't know how long it went on. Like, did we leave? We left out like after half hour, 45 minutes or something. I think.
A long time. It was a long time because I guess they do that to see how long before everyone's gone, or I don't know. But
Yeah, so I mean, I did do a little research on that. So just to add a little context, yeah, it's on that bridge in the song "You Made Me Realize." It's only a 45-second bridge or 40-second bridge, but they extend that part from anywhere to 30 minutes to 60 minutes during their live shows before they play their final song. The whole reason they do that.
Did we miss it?
So the whole reason they do that is to create sensory deprivation. So like there's one critic, Mark Kemp, he wrote, he's like, after 30 seconds the adrenaline sets in. People are screaming and shaking their fists. After a minute you wonder what's going on. After another minute it's total confusion. The noise starts hurting, the noise continues. After 3 minutes you begin to take deep breaths, and after 4 minutes a calm takes over. So like the way Kevin Shields has described it is he's seen it, like, people are pointing and they're like confused, and then as it goes on, it's almost like a religious experience. Like they got their hands up and they're just like kind of going crazy.
At no point do you stop asking, all right, are we almost, like, when's this next song starting? No point does that stop.
maybe I was not on enough drugs or something, because I did not. I just remember for us, maybe because I didn't have earplugs, and after like what felt like half an hour, may have been longer, may have been not as long. I don't know. Maybe my sensory was so deprived I lost my sense of time and space, but my ears were ringing, and I just remember not being able to hear anything. And I think I drove home. It didn't feel safe driving.
Yeah, be
and everyone
careful.
after the show just like, no, it's like, what? Like,
I took the earplugs, thankfully. But I do you remember seeing Kevin Drew there standing in the audience not too far from us? He seemed like he was pretty hypnotized by the whole thing. I think he was having a religious experience.
he probably had more drugs than us.
Yeah, there you go.
He just had better drugs.
Yeah.
And then, so I guess when they toured this album, the media wanted to pursue them for criminal negligence based on the noise, and they thought it was causing damage. No charges were ever filed or anything like that. But yeah, apparently, like during that half hour, it often hits 130 decibels. So it is a pretty crazy experience. And I mean, and one other thing, when they were recording this album, Kevin Shields and Belinda had to like stop and take a break because they were both suffering from tinnitus. And everybody's like, yeah, why don't you just turn it down? And they're like, that's not what's causing it. That's not what's causing it. But yeah, they've suffered from hearing loss as well over the years.
I think I have tinnitus now.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, that's not what's causing it. Maybe, okay, so you're handing out earplugs for no reason or whatever.
They have to do it by law.
Good. I mean, Anise needs to be able to hear the honks from incoming trucks while we're on the highway.
That's awesome. So I guess I'm glad we talked about that, because I definitely wanted to bring that up with you guys since you guys have both seen them live. So I don't recall buying this album. I didn't dig into my boxes of CDs, but I did. One note that I did take away from the album art, or not the album art, but from the liner notes, is they did thank every engineer that worked with them during the whole process. So this, and Kevin Shields said this included even people who just made like a cup of tea for us. Like if they were in the studio working, we gave them a thank you on the list. I think the majority of the album was kind of produced by the band themselves, and there was no real set producer. And then I know Alan Mulder and one other producer or engineer were kind of like involved, were kind of mainstays, but it was a revolving door the entire time.
Yeah, cool.
Did you own this album, Denise?
Yeah, I had the CD.
Yeah. So did I. It was an old style jewel case. Like, you remember the original jewel cases with, it kind of like had like a dark gray or almost black side with the like bumps on it.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't the clear stuff.
Yeah. Then they progressed.
I'm pretty sure I may have even blind bought this without even ever hearing it.
Me too.
I may have, how I heard the album. I just sort of heard so much about them, had them recommended to me, so I just blind bought it because I don't think it was expensive. I think it was one of those like $8, $9 CDs. So I just sort of picked it up.
Yeah, and that usually doesn't work out so well. Like, not like instantly. Oh, this is really good. That's what it was.
At that point, I was like heavy into collecting CDs. I'd pretty much just go to the store and buy something every week almost.
Yeah. I think the most I ever had in like a physical form, I think I had like sometimes burned on a CD, a mixed CD somewhere. But yeah, I can't recall like any of the liner notes or anything, so I don't think I actually bought this album. But it does strike me as an album that you can get for like a 2 for at HMV or something like that back in the day.
Yeah.
So how often is this in your rotation? I know you mentioned kind of off the top, and you kind of revisit it every couple years. I'm in the same boat. I'll just kind of answer real quick. I'm in the same boat where I'm not afraid to revisit these guys. I probably just don't revisit them enough. Mostly because we're doing this podcast, I'm usually listening to different things each week. But I really did enjoy listening to them this week. I might say that a lot in previous episodes, but this one was like great because I was busy at work and I was just able to get so much done this week, just with head down, listening to a lot of shoegaze, and it was awesome. I came across like a couple other bands that I really liked, like Slow Down, and I think Boris was one that was just included in that list. And yeah, it never sounds bad. It's always good.
Yeah. Even some of the more aggressive stuff, like you get into like Hum or Narrowhead or just kind of Met's Canadian band. It's even when it's a little heavier, I still like it because it still brings a lot of those elements. Even if you want to get more aggressive into the more aggressive shoegaze sound, but yeah, it definitely would be great to work to.
Mm-hmm.
Guys, question from the audience. Gordon, have you ever played guitar?
No.
Okay.
I started playing when I was a kid, but I lost interest, and then you guys already had bands when we were growing up, so I never got into that or developed interest in it. It's one of my great regrets of not knowing an instrument, but yeah. And then you kind of gave me drum lessons.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm not that great with drums, so that's my experience with instruments.
No, you were great with drums. That was awesome. But
I can do Weezer, but that's about it.
Oh, that's so funny. Poor Weezer.
But yeah, how often is this one in your rotation, right?
It's like I go to this shoegaze zone, every once in a while. It's hard to say. It's not always this album, but probably the same, like every year or two sort of thing. It's another nostalgic that like pulls me back in time, so I don't want to over listen to it because I don't want to burn out the association with that time period. You know what I mean? Because if I just like start listening to it, I'll build up a new association. So sometimes I do that, play with my own memory. But,
yeah. Right. Yeah, because for me too, I still try to keep up with some of the more dream pop, shoegazy type acts that are around now, or the ones that were still making music, because it's the type of music I particularly am more drawn to. So for that reason, it ends up coming up more often than some of the other bands I got into when I was in high school.
Yeah, plus you're still getting your fix of the shoegaze from those new bands. It's not like there's new tools that you're listening to.
Yeah.
So I guess this takes us on to our album ranking, or ranking the discography. They only have 3 albums, so I mean, who wants to go first? I don't. I wonder how many different variations. If we'll get 3 different variations out of this. Who wants to go first?
I'll go first because I've only ever listened to this album. So
Okay.
other than like when we saw them live, listening to some of the other songs they played, that's my experience of the band. So I'm guessing that this is their best album because this is what's always talked about. So this is the best one. Number 1 right here, Loveless.
But this is like the perfect example of why we're talking about this band, because like Ryan listened to this album and loved it, has no context of anything before or after, didn't follow them up, didn't anything, but just is able to appreciate this one album. But yeah, it's definitely their best. For I don't know, it kind of I kind of always associated them a bit with because I got into them around the same time with Neutral Milk Hotel.
Oh yeah.
They were both bands that were indie. I kind of found out about late. They both had a first album, and then their sophomore album was the one that became instantly iconic, and then they disappeared and didn't release anything. So it kind of created that mystery, which I think the mystery kind of probably helps with making them iconic. If they were probably spitting out an album every 2 years, it might have Loveless might be looked at a little differently, and like even Airplane Over the Sea. So yeah, an album like this will kind of live on forever because of things like that. But yeah, it's hard to put anything else on number 1. But yeah, so Loveless, and then I really liked MBV. I was kind of surprised at how good it was when I first was like when it first came out. I was like, oh, really? Like they've talked about releasing another album for years, and they finally did it. Is it going to be any good? And it was good. Like I don't know why they waited so long, but and then isn't anything? It's pretty good. Like it's not bad. It's kind of more of like I get more gothic sort of vibes from it than any of the other stuff. But yeah,
is that the more punk vibe that you were talking about, Gordon? Like where that came from?
I would say it's more mixed between Loveless and like The Cure.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh yeah. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, like what he used to saying, like that '80s goth kind of thing.
Yeah,
like
80s goth. Yeah, so that'd be my rank: Loveless, then MBV, then Isn't Anything.
Yeah, I have the exact same ranking. I really liked MBV. Apparently, it's a mix of like old and new, like pretty much the songs that they were making over the 20 years or 22 years in between the albums. So I think that's kind of why it works, where it's like it takes you along for the ride of what you're used to like the newer stuff, but it's all the same genre, right? So it's all good. And then for Isn't Anything, there's a few tracks like off. I always forget how underrated that album is, because like the first 2 or 3 tracks are just like so iconic. Like I guarantee, Ryan, if you were to hear like the first like Soft as Snow or Lose My Breath, you would recognize those instantly, because I'm sure they played those at that show. Like those are really big songs for them.
Yeah, they played 4 songs from Isn't Anything when we saw.
Oh, you got the set list up?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So I
did you get that off the stage? It's too noisy.
No, setlist.fm.
Oh.
Tells you all the info you need to know.
Yeah, that's awesome.
They played You're Still in a Dream, Feed Me With Your Kiss, Nothing Much to Lose, and You Never Should from Isn't Anything when we saw them live.
That's cool. So, and then I guess, did they play most of Loveless, like in its entirety, since they didn't have that third album out?
They played 6 songs: Coming Alone, I Only Said, Only Shallow, Soon, The Here Knows When, and When You Sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and then half an hour to like murder your ears.
Wait, hold on though. Yeah, that gets me back to something you said in the article you were referring to, that they played another song after the noise.
They finished with that song.
Okay.
Oh, do they? Okay, so maybe they do do they do an encore then?
It just ends with that song.
Oh, okay, yeah. For some reason, I thought I saw somewhere that they do play, like that's one song, and then they do play like a final.
I think maybe probably just they play the end of the song, I'd assume.
Maybe that's what it is.
Man, I don't know, like, because that's one of the reasons we were standing for so long, because you're like, okay, is this the end or not? There's no way you just don't know if it ends. And then I guess we left. I hope we didn't miss anything.
Yeah, you're so fucked up by the end, it doesn't matter.
What did you sing?
Yeah, exactly. So this was a weird Okay, I'll ask the question, but I don't really have an answer for it. Is this the band's peak? Because it seems like we all joined way later. We were 6 years old when this album came out, so we have no real attachment to it upon release or even through the 90s. And they did get back together and release another album afterwards. So is their peak somewhere else, or do you think it's like, where do you think their peak is, if they have a peak?
I don't know about like peak, but but for them, they pretty much live off of this album.
That's true.
Good point. So it has to be their peak for that element, whether it's like when it first came out in '91 and they had the critical success, when they toured it in 2008, when they came back together, when he did the Lost in Translation in 2003, which brought it more attention, and or when they released a new album, it seemed like all that stuff was equally sort of paid attention to purely because Kevin Shields and My Bloody Valentine made this album. So it's definitely their, but was 91 their peak? Was 2000 their peak? 2003 their peak? I don't know, but it's all based on this album.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's that this album is what like sustains their career. Like they live off this album, and it wasn't about like a couple hit songs. It was about the whole aesthetic, the whole feeling of it, and that's really what they're living off of. Like that. That's amazing how influential you can be without having any singles, like actual singles.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Like I said, I didn't know what their peak was. When Kevin Shields did the songs on the Lost in Translation soundtrack or worked with that soundtrack, was that like a big deal? Like, because he kind of strikes me as a guy that's kind of goes MIA, or he'll like work with some bands, but he doesn't really release solo stuff or do anything on his own.
It was a big deal. Well, online, like I remember on Pitchfork, that's when they were being kind of talked about again. So it was sort of being paid attention to, and it kind of, that movie sort of gave like the shoegaze dream pop. I kind of had a moment around 2003, was being kind of paid more attention to. Songs were being used in soundtracks. I think like Just Like Honey was used in a commercial as well around that time. It just seemed like shoegaze became kind of hip for a while. So
yeah, we should like there's a lot of that in Broken Social Scene sound too. So that we shouldn't leave them out of the mix. The shoegaze elements.
For Canadians, because their whole background, their whole first album was sort of a post rock album. Yeah.
So we've been talking about this kind of throughout, but or maybe we can combine the two questions. Where do you see this album like in their place in history? And do you think this album is essential? We could probably just combine the two questions because I think they're probably related.
Yeah. Their place in history is exactly this. Like us, we discovered them 10 years after. Like they're that band that I think music lovers are going to just rediscover every 5 years. That's why it's hard to say a peak, because for us, we discovered, like for me or us, we discovered them 2001, 2, but then 2003, it seemed like that's when a lot more people discovered them. And then 2008, they reunited, so they were probably gaining more fans. But their name is always thrown around. Like you read so many reviews where they become like a shorthand for shoegaze, or like almost a synonym for shoegaze, right? So their place in history is just writing pretty much a genre-defining album. Very few bands have done it, and I know it is like a subgenre, but it is one that you see impacts in the mainstream, whether it was seen a bit in the early 90s alternative, or a little bit in nu metal, or a little bit in pop music, or whatever, wherever you see it, or indie rock it was really big in. So it is an important album. I think people should listen to it. Even if you never listen to shoegaze and you listen to this album and you hate it, I still think you should listen to it. It's just kind of an interesting album. And I guess if we're combining it, then yeah, that goes into it being essential. I think it's an important album for rock music specifically, shoegaze. Just listen to it. It's good from top to bottom. Like it's hard to pick out a track because the whole thing is so good.
Yeah, I would say it's essential, and its place in history. I mean, it is obvious if you like indie rock at all, or 90s rock, really. If you listen and you haven't heard this, if you listen to this, you're gonna like it. Like it, I don't think and not only just that, even if you don't like it, you're gonna hear a bunch of familiar elements because you
Mhm.
can't. The influence was so strong. Like if you like any indie rock, you're gonna hear little bits. So whether it's in the guitars or the subdued vocals or the lo-fi drums, whatever it is.
Yeah, especially nowadays, a lot of people like that whole lo-fi beats thing. We kind of
Yeah.
touched a bit on the Bjork episode, where people are kind of into the more minimalistic. Whereas this isn't really minimalistic in the same way that those electro songs are, but it kind of creates the same sort of vibe, like a very chill vibe. Like it fits for just hanging out, for driving, for sitting outside, for being by the pool. Like it can work in any setting.
I wonder
Yeah.
if it would have lost that element if the drummer wasn't sick. If he actually was playing live drums on every track. The drums, because it's really the subdued drums that have a lot to do with that.
Yeah, it's more like a pulse than it is like a beat.
Yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you guys. I think it is an essential album, especially 90s rock. It doesn't feel like 80s rock. I mean, it did come out in the 90s, but it does have elements mixing the both together, or the two together. I think the biggest thing, for anybody who doesn't really know what shoegaze is, or hasn't heard a lot of it, I think this is a good entry point for anybody to come into it. Like, yeah, maybe you like the Pumpkins, that's the closest you've got to it, or Deftones or something like that. But I think anybody could probably get into this, like listen to this album for the first time, and they'll probably end up listening to it the whole way through. And I think, especially with Spotify, you can put this album on and then just let Spotify play out and see where it takes you down the shoegaze rabbit hole. And I guarantee you're probably going to like the majority of the tracks that wherever Spotify takes you, because yeah, it's just great stuff. Like, especially if I think there's also two eras to this band, or especially for this album. Like, you got the 90s stuff where other bands tried to emulate that, and then it seemed like there was almost like a revival in the 2000s with what you were mentioning, Denise, like the indie rock and stuff like that, and even Deftones not trying but doing it later on. So it kind of has like two different eras that it created after. So I think it's essential for that reason. Just for the shoegaze element to it, for sure.
But I think that part of the reason it doesn't appeal to a wide audience, I think we've talked about this already, but like you said, like, oh, you'll put it on, you'll probably like it. Well, if you can get past the fact that the vocals aren't that prominent, because that really does turn off a lot of people. So, but it influenced a lot of musicians that were trendsetters, and a lot of musicians maybe don't care just about the vocals so much.
That was something I remember noticing around that same era, like 2001, 2, where I was getting into bands like Mogwai and Sigur Rós, where I'd play it for some fans and they'd be like, when is the singing coming in? And I was like, oh,
Exactly.
to me, I didn't even think of that. Or it's interesting that you mentioned Broken Social Scene, because I remember the first time I listened to them, You Forgot It in People, that album was from top to bottom. And I remember I didn't even notice it on first listen that some whole songs didn't have vocals in it. The songs were just so interesting that I didn't really notice that it was missing. So like, I don't know if you're, maybe some people are, I know a lot of people are into like singing along with songs and stuff, but if you're into interesting music and you're actively listening, then yeah,
Yeah.
is good for that. But then again, it does create a good vibe. So even if you just have it on in the background, even having it on a stereo with the volume kind of turned down, where you can kind of just hear the fuzzy guitar, it kind of works. I don't know, it's such a good vibe. Maybe it's just me.
No, totally. If you want to go to Dreamland for a little bit and just chill out, well, you get some work done, maybe, Gordon. Yeah, throw on Loveless.
Yeah, it's definitely it's good. It's a good album to work to, or it's a good album to smoke a joint and listen to. You're gonna, I think you'll enjoy all the textures.
Definitely.
And yeah, you're right. I mean, if you're looking for pop songs that you can sing along to, yeah, you're probably not gonna like this one so much. But I mean, if you do like just that guitar sound, that big loud guitar sound, I think you'll find, if you haven't heard this album, you're in for a treat.
There's something actually this just came to mind. I was telling a friend today. I'm like, even like for like the soundtrack of I know a lot of people like to listen to the soundtrack of Social Network when that came out, and that's very shoegaze. That's very shoegazy, very wall of soundy. So that's another. You see that aesthetic is being used in movies and stuff too now. So it's kind of becoming more of a general, becoming more widespread, I guess, that whole fuzzy shoegazy sound.
Yeah. It doesn't sound dated.
No, it doesn't.
Yeah, no, you're right. So that's all I got. I don't know. Do you guys have any final thoughts before we let it go?
Sounds
Yep.
good. I'll roll the credits.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining us this week on the Essential Albums podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, feel free to chat and like and subscribe. And you can check us on Spotify or Anchor, wherever you find your podcasts. Next week, we're doing Nirvana, right?
Yeah, we're doing like a 3-part Dave Grohl thing. So we're going to do Nirvana next week, followed by the Foo Fighters, The Color and the Shape. And then we're going to end it all off with Songs for the Deaf with Queens of the Stone Age. I think that's going to end our season 1. So we might take a couple of weeks off after that before we come back. Or we might try something different before we come back with another album.
Yeah, try some things out.
Yeah,
And
follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and all that stuff. The Essential Albums Podcast, probably on the screen somewhere.
Yep, should be if we did this right. In the comments.
Yep.
Original music by Ryan Dugal and artwork by Vincent Tran. See you guys next week.
Bye-bye.